I wanted to just start off today giving a little bit of backstory about how this all came to be before we jump right into the council. I'll try to do so as briefly as possible so we don't, waste too much time. Um, but the story all begins in California, in Arcata, California, where I was, I think, 18 years old and was living in Brother Tom's attic. And because I was, I think I had very little funds, or I was a starving college student, and had been playing African music since I was 14 years old. And I think I heard my first recording of the mbira, which is this instrument here. If people aren't familiar with it, I don't know if you can see, it's kind of dark, but this instrument here, and that there was something about hearing the instrument that just like called me to, I had to go to the place where this instrument was from. I had no idea why. It was one of those intuitive callings that it's so strong. It was so strong in me. There was no denying it. No, I just knew I was going to go. So long story short, I bought a one-way ticket to Zimbabwe. I didn't know anybody there. Had no connection whatsoever, and I just got off the plane and started asking where I could find the mbira. So little did I know that the mbira is not just a regular instrument like a guitar is in our culture. An mbira is used for ceremonies called bira ceremonies, and at those bira ceremonies, the mbira, so it's mbira and bira. The mbira is played at the mbira ceremony to call spirits. And the Shona people of Zimbabwe, who are the keepers of the mbira and these mbira ceremonies, for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, unbroken, they have had ceremonies where ancestors move through a channel, or what they call a shikiro. Their word for a channel or a medium is shikiro. And the spirits come through those people during these ceremonies. And the mbira is used as a telephone line, and also to put the medium's body into the vibration closer to the spirit, so that the spirit can enter into the body. So I found myself following this instrument, but if you play this instrument, you will find yourself at the mbira ceremonies, because that is where it's played, and that's its main use. So I had no inclination of being a medium or doing any of this spirit work. I was simply, for part of the story is I was just following the passion in the mbira. So I spent over 10 years there. I've had many stories. I'm not going to go into all of those, but towards the end of my 10 years, I went to this very famous medium's place. His spirit was called Nuandu, and the man himself was called Mandere, Sekuru Mandere, or Grandfather Mandere. So I went there, and he knew this name that no one else knew in Africa, that I was given in in the Sierras. And Brother Tom, who's here joining us today, he knew the name, but in Africa, I never told anyone this name, and the name was Shamtusa, which means wind on the mountain, means the sound of the wind on the mountain. It was like this. So I used it for a little bit, but I was a little bit embarrassed of it. So I just stopped, and no one in Africa knew it. And the spirit medium had me come before him and said, "You are Shamtusa. You have a spirit that's behind you, and the spirit wants to, you've made an agreement to talk, let the spirit talk through you. And so you need to do this initiation." And the bad part was I was planning to go home in a few days. I had been home for years, and they made me cancel my ticket and stay on and do this initiation, which I more did out of respect, just of them, but I didn't believe anything really of it. I was very just focused on loving the music, and I love the ceremonies, but I never thought, oh, I'm not really Shona, so this isn't for me. It's not my spirit. So I did the ceremony, and then at the end of the ceremony, he said, "Okay, your spirit that is coming is not an African spirit; it's an ancient European spirit, and there's some certain things in those protocols that you're going to need for the spirit when the spirit comes. And I was like, oh my gosh, what is this? So the number one thing was whale oil, that that during the times of these spirits, the whales would beach themselves, and when this ancestor was alive, the whales would beach themselves, and they would use the oil of the whale as like a very sacred heal all blessing oint, anointing oil, whatever was the second thing most sacred to my ancestors' people, besides your own body and water. So like it's called injata, the whale oil. So that was one thing. I had to get this trident, kanakane, and there was a few other things that I get. And one of the strangest ones, they said, in your lineage, the spirit has to pass through your father first. And so I was like, oh, this is a done deal, because my father was a Christian minister, and African spirit possession to my father would have been equal to like demon, allowing a demon to take him over. So I was like, well, this is never going to happen. And I'm never going to be able to find whale oil. And how am I going to make a trident? How am I going to? So I just sort of like wrote it off like, what a good experience. This is wonderful. This is great. I at least like know what a medium goes through. It was a pretty rigorous initiation. And but I think I had 2 calls when I got home. And this is why I'm so glad that Brother Tom is joining us here today, because I called him and I said, man, you wouldn't believe what happened. But you give me these tasks that are too impossible. So I went through this initiation, so it's not going to really happen. But anyway, and I think he said, well, what are they? And I said, well, the first thing is I got to find whale oil. And Brother Tom is an extraordinary painter, and he was painting a house, and he can correct me if I'm wrong. He was painting a house in Trinidad, and he said something along the lines of, I was painting this house the other day, and this old man, I asked him, there was these buckets of stuff in the basement. Trinidad used to be an old whaling port or site. And he said, there was these buckets of stuff in the basement. And I asked the guy what it was, and he said it was whale oil. And that he doesn't need, and he doesn't know what to do with it. I'm like, are you kidding me, Brother Tom? Are you joking? He's like, nope, send it to you right now. He went down, got it, harvested the whale oil, and here I have my whale oil. So that happened a little bit later. After this call, I called my dad and wanted to tell my dad about the experience. So I call my dad and can't get a hold of him. He's not answering the phone. Finally, I call my aunt. I say, Aunt Larisse, where's Dad? I can't get a hold of Dad. And said, oh, he's in the hospital. And I said, he's in the hospital. What happened to him? She said, it's hard to explain, but you should probably talk to the police, because they're the ones who got him in the hospital. And I remember I called the hospital, but he couldn't talk to me because he was strapped with leather. They had to strap him down. So what had happened was that my dad, for some reason, set off his own alarm. He was in he describes it that he was in some sort of very a spiritual aloof space. And he went into his house and he opened his door. He got into his house. He didn't shut off his alarm. And I don't know if he was naked or he was just wearing something very, modest, but he was in his house sitting, meditating. And the police came in and they're like, sir, who are you? And asked him who he was. And he didn't say his name. He said some other strange name to them. He said, well, you're breaking and entering. You're under arrest. And I think he warned them not to touch him. But and he was, maybe his late 60s or early 70s, warned him not to touch him. And they tried to touch him. And he was suddenly the most amazing martial artist that they had ever seen. And he took all the police, they called in reinforcements, they called fire trucks. And he was like, apparently a masterful, he didn't hurt, he jarred one fireman's back. And he was very upset about that because he used to be a fireman. But he doesn't remember this. To get straight with the story. My dad was fully possessed, and no one could touch him. And they said that it was amazing that he was like working them like peacefully, like Tai Chi, all over his front yard. And I don't know the exact number, but it was between 15 and 20 policemen and firemen. So they finally subdued him. I think they subdued him with the taser, which electricity is, we're as mediums are very sensitive to that. So I think they tased him, and that finally, or they finally got. I wasn't there, and he didn't remember, and the police chief was pretty traumatized by it because there was nothing wrong with him when they got him to the hospital. They ran tests, and they didn't know how to treat him or what was going on. So they put the phone up to his ear in hospital. I said, Dad, I think I know what happened. Like, I'm coming to get you. He's like, if you know what happened, please come, because nobody else here knows what happened. And I convinced them to let him out of the leather straps. I flew to California and grabbed him and took him to the ocean. And we said, Dad, I'm so sorry. This is what's going on. And I have to put you in the ocean. We have to do a ceremony, and then the spirit will leave you, come on me, because that's what, for some reason, this had to happen this way. I'm so sorry. My dad, who would like normally have been like, hell no, I'm not doing a ceremony with you in the ocean, was like, get me in the ocean right now. So me and Dad went in, we did our prayer ceremony, and my dad, and then the spirit came to me. Now, there's another very important part about this story, is that after this, I had to do a ceremony with the whale oil, with the things they had me make. And my dad had to be present there because he had to condone it and like literally pass it on to me. And we did that ceremony, and I was supposed to be possessed, or I was supposed to take on the spirit, and I never did. The ceremony, and so I actually just thought, okay, we're giving up. And so really, Haha or Fuana started coming through several years later. I went back and I was doing work in South Africa. I was recording music of the Sangoma, who are the traditional healers and mediums of South Africa, the Xhosa people. And when I went to go work with this one Sangoma, they throw the bones to do divination, and they were like, "Oh, no, we're not doing music. You are got to go in immediately. You got to finish your initiation. There's some things that need to still be done because your spirit is ready now to come through, and we have to cancel all the music. You're gonna." And right then and there, I had to like strip down, and they took everything that you have and they burn it. They burnt my passport. They burnt whatever cash I had on me. Everything was burnt, and I was thrown immediately into a ceremony that I was not expecting whatsoever. And then after that ceremony again, definitely the spirit was coming then, but it was not a full possession. And then I was meditating a lot after that, and as I was meditating, my body began to move, and it wasn't me moving my body. And then one day a word came out, and that word was Alitha Laheme, which means, now we know it means heaven on earth. And that was, I did not say that word. Something spoke the word from me. I could sense, the minute I sensed that it wasn't me, that was the day that I started to be able to really let Haha come through. And so that's the general basic story. It's a little different than a lot of people that work with mediums here in the West, because I went through an African training, even though Fuana or Haha is not African per se. They maintain the methodology in Zimbabwe. The Shona people have maintained a tradition and a technology and know-how as to how to prepare a human body for contact, for marriage to spirit, which we're learning more and more is really a lot to do with the DNA. It's less of what we think of like a ghost coming up on someone, but actually what we call junk DNA. The technology is we activate the junk DNA, what we call junk DNA, but actually that is where your ancestors live, and each of us have that. So in this process, I'm waking up my junk DNA, and so to such a precise degree that the spirit can speak through now my body, because it's inhabiting not every part of my DNA is being inhabited that time. So that's the story. And like I say, I'm so glad Brother Tom was here because he saw me before I went to Africa. I was writing him letters while I was in Africa, and he was so certainly a part of my journey when I returned home. And it just means a lot because people normally, this kind of story is fantastical in a certain sense, and some people might have a hard time believing it, but there, luckily, there's many people, not many, but there's people that were there along the journey with me. You know, like my sisters would be, and my brother would be able to tell you about what happened to my dad and my aunt. So it's all a real story, and it is where we are now.